Welcome to the deep dive. We have a really highly unusual mission for you today.
Yeah, very unusual.
Because normally we sit down with, a massive stack of research papers or maybe a thick historical biography.
Or like a really dense scientific journal article.
Exactly. And our goal is usually to sift through hundreds of pages of information to bring you the core insights. But today, our entire source material is exactly 22 words long.
Which is astonishingly brief. I mean, it is just a tiny fragment of text,
It's
really.
really a single digital yellow sticky note.
Yeah.
That is all we are working with here.
Right.
But the mission of this deep dive is to completely deconstruct this single, incredibly dense sentence. We want to uncover the massive sci-fi, philosophical, and, linguistic implications hiding within its 22 words.
There's a lot packed in there.
There really is.
Mm-hmm.
So just to ensure you know exactly what we are analyzing today, I'm going to read the text of this sticky note to you in its entirety right now.
Go for it.
Okay, so at the top, in what looks like a title, it says in quotation marks, "Notoriously last."
Okay.
And then right below that, the text reads, "Authenticating any famous last words of a known time traveler is notoriously difficult and is not without dire fraught."
And that is the whole note. Nothing more.
Yeah, 22 words. But those 22 words contain a mind-bending logical paradox, a super bizarre grammatical anomaly, and like a very ominous suggestion that meddling with the historical record carries some specific, terrifying dangers.
Because normally when we talk about history, there is this comforting expectation of geometry.
Geometry? What do you mean?
Well, we expect history to be a straight line. You have a timeline, and on that timeline you have a person's life. They are born, they do some things, and then there is a definitive endpoint.
Right, a period at the end of the sentence.
Exactly. You look up a historical figure, and the encyclopedia gives you those two concrete dates in parentheses, right? Their birth and their death. It's clean, it's linear.
Yeah, and we rely on those brackets because they make sense of the chronological world we inhabit.
We do. We absolutely need things to have a definitive start and a definitive observable finish just to process causality. Event A leads to event B, which ends at event C.
Makes total sense.
But the moment you introduce a consciousness that can step outside that relentless forward march of time, every single metric we use to measure a life simply breaks down. The straight line is tied into a knot.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to talk about the difficulty of authenticating the text mentioned in the note, we have to grapple with the logical nightmare of the subject itself.
The definition of the word last.
Right. We have to figure out how to even define what last means for a being who is entirely unstuck in time. The title of the note itself is Notoriously Last. How can you possibly define the end of someone who doesn't experience time linearly?
It's incredibly tricky.
Let's think about it like a choose-your-own-adventure book. You know, the ones where you keep all your fingers tucked into different pages to save your place, just in case you make a bad choice.
Oh, yeah. That is basically the physical manifestation of trying to control a timeline.
Exactly. So you read up to page 10, and the book says, if you want to open the mysterious door, turn to page 40. If you want to run away, turn to page 12.
And you obviously choose the door.
Obviously. So you turn to page 40, and the ceiling immediately caves in on you. The end.
Right.
That is technically a last page. But you kept your finger on page 10. So you flip back, and this time you turn to page 12, and you go on this sprawling adventure that ends on page 90 with you retiring on a sunny beach somewhere.
A much better outcome.
Definitely. But which ending is your actual last one? Is it the one where you experience the biological end of your physical body? Or is it the absolute final point in the chronological history of the universe that you happen to visit?
I love that analogy. The choose-your-own-adventure setup captures the core of the historian's dilemma beautifully. When the sticky note references the famous last words of a known time traveler, it forces us to ask whose timeline is being used as the baseline.
The travelers or the universes?
Precisely. Because to the linear observer, last simply means the final moment chronologically. But to a nonlinear entity, their biological timeline is completely divorced from the universe's chronological timeline.
Okay, let's map that out for a second to make sure we're on the same page. If a time traveler is born in the year 2100, biologically ages 40 years, travels back to the year 1800, and dies there, what were their last words? Are they the words spoken on their deathbed in 1800?
Well, to a historian looking at a linear timeline, yes. Those are the final words of a mysterious stranger who died in 1800.
Right, but what about the traveler?
See, to the timeline of the universe itself, those words were spoken 300 years before the traveler's first words as a baby in 2100. The concept of last loses all structural integrity there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that really breaks the brain.
It does, and this is why the title Notoriously Last reads like a dark academic joke. It highlights this universal frustration among temporal historians. Applying linear human concepts, like last words, to a non-linear entity fundamentally breaks our standard understanding of history.
It makes my brain hurt just trying to sequence a biography like that. I mean, if you are writing the definitive biography of this traveler, do you put the 1800 deathbed quote at the end of the book?
Or do you put it in the middle? Because from the traveler's perspective, maybe they jumped forward to the year 3000 right before they jumped back to 1800.
Exactly. You aren't just writing a history book anymore at that point. You are trying to mathematically map out a four-dimensional lifespan just to figure out when the biological end actually occurred.
Which means causality has collapsed. If an event in 1800 is the direct result of a decision made in 3000 by a person born in 2100, the historian is no longer tracing a straight line.
They're tracing a tangled mess.
They are untangling a massive web. And that definitional nightmare is really just the prerequisite for the actual task described in the note.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back on the core premise of the note here for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
The sticky note explicitly states that authenticating the last words of a known time traveler is notoriously difficult. But, I mean, isn't authenticating anyone's dying words notoriously difficult?
It definitely can be, yes.
Right. Look at Julius Caesar. Did he really say et tu, Brute when he was assassinated? Or was that just William Shakespeare giving him really good dialogue centuries later?
That's a great example.
Or like, did Marie Antoinette actually say, let him eat cake?
Hmm.
Historically, last words are almost impossible to verify anyway because there are rarely reliable witnesses. Or, the witnesses have conflicting agendas.
People tend to write down what sounds the best.
Exactly. So why does this sticky note go out of its way to specify that this is uniquely, notoriously difficult, specifically for a time traveler?
What's fascinating here is the specific use of the words known and famous. The note isn't describing a covert traveler operating in the shadows. It specifies a known time traveler whose last words are famous.
So they are a public figure.
Right. This implies their existence is a matter of public or historical record in whatever era this note originates. People are actively aware of them, and people are actively looking for these final words.
Ah, okay. So it's not a lack of attention. It's not like the Julius Caesar situation where we're just hoping someone in the room happened to write down the exact phrasing correctly.
The dynamic is entirely different. With a linear historical figure, the historian's problem is a lack of reliable evidence stemming from a single fixed point in the past. It happened once, and you just hope you can find a dusty diary that captured it.
You hope someone was taking notes.
Exactly. But with a known time traveler, the problem isn't a lack of evidence. The problem is that the evidence itself is a moving target. We have to consider the mechanics of how a timeline generates evidence.
What do you mean by how it generates evidence?
Okay, imagine our known time traveler realizes they are on their deathbed. They utter some final words, realize they sound entirely foolish, and with their dying breath, manage to trigger a micro jump back in time by 5 minutes to try again.
Oh my God.
Right. They deliver a much more profound philosophical catchphrase, and then they expire.
That is the ultimate conversational do-over. I think we have all wished we could do that after a bad argument.
We certainly have. But consider the impact of that do-over on the historical record. In a purely linear universe, the second attempt would simply overwrite the first.
The first embarrassing death speech would just cease to exist.
Yes, but the sticky note implies the authentication process is a nightmare. This suggests that the timelines don't cleanly overwrite each other, they branch. Or they leave temporal residue.
So both events leave a historical footprint. That is wild.
Every time the traveler loops back and alters their own final moments, they are generating multiple conflicting sets of last words across slightly different iterations of reality.
So the historian trying to authenticate the quote isn't looking at a blank page.
No, not at all.
They are looking at a document where a dozen different final edits have been overlaid on top of each other.
Exactly. If you are authenticating George Washington's last words, it's a static puzzle. You dig through enough letters from the people in the room on that specific day in 1799, and you piece together the most likely scenario.
It's hard, but it's grounded in one reality.
Right. But if you are a temporal historian dealing with this known time traveler, you might uncover three different primary sources who all have completely valid, perfectly authentic memories of three completely different deathbed speeches.
Because all three speeches actually occurred. They're all authentic.
Yes. The burden of proof becomes astronomical. You are no longer trying to determine which witness is lying or mistaken. You are dealing with a scenario where all the witnesses are telling the objective truth about their specific timeline iteration.
Man, how does a historian definitively declare one set of words the true final words when the universe itself has recorded multiple versions of the event?
It's an impossible moving target.
You essentially have to authenticate the physical reality of the timeline itself before you can even begin to authenticate the words spoken within it. It's like trying to verify a quote in a book, but every time you open the book, the chapter order has changed, the font is different, and the ending has been rewritten.
That is a perfect way to put it. The task isn't just hard, it actively defies the foundational tools of historical research.
Yeah, you can't just use standard fact-checking for that.
And that profound, almost existential level of difficulty brings us directly to the final clause of our 22-word sticky note, the consequence of taking on this impossible task.
Yes, here where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is the part of the sticky note that has been driving me the most crazy, because the author actually breaks the rules of the English language to deliver this warning.
The linguistic anomaly at the very end of the sentence, it's fascinating.
Let me read that final clause for you again, just so it's fresh. The note says that authenticating these words is notoriously difficult and is not without dire fraught. Now, if you are a bit of a grammar nerd, you probably just felt a little twitch in your eye hearing that.
Oh, absolutely. It is incredibly jarring. It sounds fundamentally wrong to the ear.
It does, because the word fraught is almost exclusively used as an adjective. We say a situation is fraught with danger, or a silence is fraught with tension.
Right, it's a descriptive word.
Exactly. It means being filled with or destined to result in something undesirable. But here, the author drops the with entirely and uses fraught as a standalone noun.
And then they modify it with another adjective.
Right. Dire. Dire fraught. It is as bizarre and uncomfortable as saying a situation is full of dire, dangerous, or severe risky. It's just not how the word operates in any standard dictionary.
This raises an important question, doesn't it? The author of this note has, up until this point, used perfectly sound, somewhat academic phrasing. So why would they suddenly bend the rules of grammar so violently at the exact moment they are delivering their final warning?
You don't just accidentally invent a noun in a written document. It feels deliberate.
Or, at the very least, it feels like a subconscious manifestation of a system that is breaking down.
A system breaking down. I like that.
Think about it. We have to consider the limitations of standard language. Our vocabulary, our grammar, our entire linguistic structure evolved to describe the human experience within linear time.
Right.
We have highly specific words for linear emotions. We have grief for the pain of losing someone in the past. We have anxiety for the anticipation of the future. We have a nostalgia for a fond look backward.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. But what words do we have for the specific, unique peril of authenticating temporal paradoxes?
But you don't have any. It's not a human experience we have ever needed to categorize.
Standard language fails completely in this context. What word do you use to describe the psychological toll of watching a timeline shift in front of your eyes? What is the vocabulary for realizing the primary source document you are holding has just rewritten itself?
There isn't one.
Exactly. I believe the author bent the grammar to create a new concept because the reality of the situation demanded it. Dire fraught, as a noun, implies a state of being that is entirely unique to time travel.
By taking fraught, a word that normally just implies a heavy burden of anxiety, and turning it into a noun, the author is turning that anxiety into a tangible physical entity.
It becomes a destination.
Right. It makes it a place you can stumble into. It's not just a situation that is tense. You're actually entering a zone of dire fraught. It suggests that the dread associated with timeline meddling has mass. It has gravity.
It implies a persistent existential dread that you cannot simply walk away from. And think about the modifier they used, dire.
Yeah, dire is pretty heavy.
Dire means extremely serious or urgent, usually pointing toward an unavoidable disaster. So, dire fraught isn't just an academic headache or a frustrating day at the archives. It suggests a catastrophic consequence.
A danger so strange, so far outside the bounds of normal human experience, that the author had to shatter the rules of language just to convey the shape of the warning.
That's beautifully put.
It's kind of like when physicists discover a new quantum particle that behaves in ways that defy classical mechanics. They have to invent entirely new naming conventions because nothing in the current glossary covers it.
Yes.
The historian who wrote this sticky note discovered a new type of historical danger, a temporal paradox danger, and they had to invent dire fraught to classify it.
And notice the grammatical structure right before the invented noun. The author uses a double negative.
Oh yeah, the authentication is not without dire fraught.
It's a very cautious academic way of phrasing a threat.
It is. They aren't saying it might be dangerous, and they aren't saying it will definitively destroy you in a burst of light.
No, they're saying you cannot escape the presence of this intense, timeline-breaking dread if you pursue this path. The dread is a fundamental, inseparable property of the task itself. You cannot isolate the historical research from the temporal consequences.
It's baked into the cake.
Yeah.
If you try to nail down the shifting last words of a time traveler, you are guaranteed to encounter this broken grammar level of existential threat. The grammar breaks down on the page at the exact moment the concept of reality breaks down for the researcher.
It really is an incredibly profound meditation on the limits of human understanding, all packed into a space the size of a digital Post-it note.
It's amazing.
We fundamentally crave order. We want the timeline to make sense. We want to put those definitive birth and death dates in their neat little parentheses. But the sticky note reminds us that the universe, especially a universe containing a time traveler, is not obligated to conform to our linear bookkeeping.
So what does this all mean? We started today's deep dive with 22 words on a digital sticky note, and we have unpacked a universe of logical and linguistic complications.
We certainly have.
To summarize for you, this tiny fragment of text isn't just a quirky little sci-fi thought experiment about whether someone said something clever on their deathbed. This note is a dense, highly specific warning.
A very dire warning.
First, it highlights the sheer impossibility of applying linear historical standards, like trying to define what a last moment even is, to nonlinear beings who experience biological time completely differently than chronological time.
Right.
Second, it points out that when historical evidence can actively rewrite itself across multiple branching timelines, authentication isn't just hard. It's an impossible moving target that defies standard academic logic.
Because every timeline might be objectively true.
Exactly. And finally, it warns us that attempting this impossible task carries a unique, indescribable dread, a dire fraught that literally breaks the boundaries of our language.
It serves as a boundary marker, a warning sign at the edge of the map where linear history ends and chaos begins.
And that leaves us with one final, very provocative thread to pull on, a thought for you to take with you and mull over long after this deep dive is over. We've talked extensively about the difficulty of the task, the multiple overlapping realities, and the linguistic dread associated with trying to sort it all out.
The dire fraught.
Right. But think about the literal mechanics of a time loop for a second. If the act of authenticating these words carries this dire fraught, this severe, indescribable consequence, what actually happens if the historians get it wrong?
Oh, the consequences of an incorrect historical anchor.
Think about it. Let's say our temporal historians sift through all those overlapping timelines, all those contradictory deathbed speeches. They fight through the zone of dire fraught, and they finally publish the official, authenticated, famous last words of this known time traveler. But they picked the wrong ones.
They plant their flag on a false historical endpoint.
Exactly. What happens to the timeline then? Does pinning down that incorrect endpoint artificially force the time traveler's shifting reality to collapse into a single incorrect state?
A forced resolution of the paradox. That would be catastrophic.
Does authenticating the wrong words accidentally rewrite our own history in the process? If we go back to our opening metaphor, the expectation of geometry, the straight line of history, the definitive brackets at the end of a life, we like those brackets to act as anchors, holding our understanding of the past in place.
Anchors are essential.
But if you drop an anchor into a sea of nonlinear time, and you drop it in the wrong place, maybe you don't secure the ship. Maybe you just drag the entire ocean down with you.
That is a terrifying thought.
Consider the literal world-ending danger of misquoting the future. It gives a whole new meaning to dire fraught, doesn't it?